لكن تحديت الظروف وخضتها وحدي صبورا مستعينا بالصلاة. كم مرة عصف الأنين بداخلي، كم مرة قد ذاق قلبي من أساه محن تمر، وكم كرهت مصابها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The ongoing conflict in Palestine has brought the Ummah together and has resulted in many events, conferences, lectures, educating the Ummah regarding the status of Palestine, Ardu Muqaddisa, Masjid al-Aqsa, and the surrounding areas, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, الَّذِي بَارَكْنَا حَوْلَهُ. At the same time, due to the political situation that's taking place in and around the Middle East, which has been inflamed since 2003. It started in 2001 in Afghanistan, but the region has been pretty unstable due to foreign intervention and then the dictators that are hoarding, the wealth of the Ummah, subsequently the Arab Spring, and you know what happened thereafter. There's been a healthy discussion in connection to how Muslims, Sunni and Shia, and again, Shia has different spectrums, and so do Sunnis. So we're not going to go into the whole, who's Sunni and who's Shia, etc. There's been a discussion on social media and outside of social media. I've had these personal discussions myself in connection to the political scene, geopolitics in the region, regarding the Ummah coming together across different fronts. And this is in relation to Sunni Shia unity. Now, I have always been consistent, as far as I'm aware, where I have said that Sunni and Shia can coexist in the Muslim lands and can coexist here in the West. There's no problem having, mutual differences and coexisting. But at the same time, there is no unification between Sunni and Shia due to our theological differences. So the natural discussion now is, how can Sunni and Shia come together in the midst of what's happening in Palestine? And I think a cursory understanding of history in the past and in our modern history will give us the answers. The question which is frequently asked: Sunnis and Shia must come together in light of what is happening in Gaza. And that's what I've been hearing regularly. As I alluded to in my introduction, that you have to look at history. You have to have a cursory understanding of recent developments, modern history as well as the past. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi lived through many tribulations, which is similar to our reality today, in accordance to foreign threats, internal divisions, Sunni Shia polemics or problems. And what we have to do is look at how much issues that the Rafidah have caused Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah throughout our history. But at the same time, we will also go into when Sunni and Shia did come together to deal with a foreign threat. Let's present the statements of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, then we'll go into the story of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi, and then we can conclude based on which side you align with, whether it's possible or whether it's not possible. So as you can see on screen, we've got Minhaj Sunnah Nabawiyah by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Now anyone knows about Minhaj Sunnah Nabawiyah. It was written in response to a Shia scholar by the name of Al-Hilli who wrote a book called Minhaj al-Kiramiyah, and he responded to him. So, as you can see on screen, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned that for Ahl Sunnati yasta'miluna ma'ahum al-adl wal-insaf, that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah deal with them with justice and fairness. وَلَا يَظْلِمُونَهُمْ فَإِنَّ الظُّلْمَ حَرَامٌ مُطْلَقًا كَمَا تَقَدَّمَ. Because dhulm is haram. Look at the fairness of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Absolutely. Which we will get into. Come back to me now. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah here is affirming that Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah are fair to those who we oppose with. We are fair. We deal with fairness and justice. Okay? And we don't oppress them. Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah don't oppress their theological opponents, whether it be Rafidah, whether it be the Takfiriyun. I'm bringing it to today's reality. If I start saying the Murji'ah, the Karamiyah, the Mushabbiha, the Murji'ah, meaning the original Murji'ah, etc., and everything else, then we're just speaking in connection to the historical deviated innovators. But today's reality, when we got those groups that we differ with, obviously the Rafidah, then we've got the Takfiriyun of today, then we have those extreme Madakhila, these diluted Salafis, as I like to call them, the pseudo-Salafis, who are brown-nosing rulers. We're fair. We are fair. And we don't oppress them. We don't. Because dhulm is haram. No matter who it is, dhulm is haram. Absolutely. So I just want to place a foundation for the introduction of the video that, as Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam, rahmatullah alayhi, said that Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah are fair. Okay? We are fair. The Rafidah, when they gain authority and power over Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, they behave violently and aggressively. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah highlights this fact. And to add on to his justice, not just by mere pen to paper, I will show you Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's justice practically, how he dealt with them when they oppressed as well. We're going to get into that. So as you can see on screen, we're still reading from Minhaj Sunnah Nabawiyah, and he mentions وَالْأَهْلُ سُنَّةِ تَقَاوَةُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, that Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah are the purest, or have purity from amongst the Muslims. فَهُمْ خَيْرُ النَّاسِ لِلنَّاسِ, and they are the best of people to the people. Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, no doubt about it. وَقَدْ عَلِمَ أَنَّهُ كَانَ بِسَاحِلِ الشَّامِ, that it is known, right? It is known that in the sort of coastal areas of Sham, Jabalun Kabirun, there is a huge mountain. فيه ألوف من الرافضة, there's thousands of Rafidah. يسفكون الدماء الناس, that they spill the blood of the people. ويأخذون أموالهم, and they take their wealth. وقتلوا خلقا عظيما وأخذوا أموالهم, that they kill huge amounts of people and they also take their wealth. Now, coming back to me, I'm going to carry on reading to get into the historical account. So, as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned, that in Sham there's a huge mountain, and there are thousands of Rafidah. There's thousands of Rawafid, right? So, if Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah wanted to completely eradicate them, commit a genocide, they could have, because they were the leading authority. They ruled over Sham for thousands of years, whether it be from the time of the Abbasids, as the Shia, group started to emerge as a theological sect rather than a political sect. That could have been possible. But Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, we have adl and insaf, and we don't oppress them. We don't oppress them. This group or region slaughtered thousands of people from amongst Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and they spilt their blood and they took their wealth, etc., etc. Now, did this happen in our reality? Of course it does. It's still happening in Syria, and it's happened in Iraq. And it continues to happen in the areas where they are more dominant. But Amnesty International, right, highlights that when fanatical extremist Shia, which once again, when they gain power and authority, they start behaving in that manner. So as you can see, we've got a report from Amnesty International, absolute impunity, militia rule in Iraq. So the introduction. In recent months, Shia militias have been abducting and killing Sunni civilian men in Baghdad and around the country. These militias, often armed and backed by the government of Iraq, continue to operate in varying degrees of cooperation with government forces, ranging from tactic consent to coordinate or even joint operations. For these reasons, Amnesty International holds the government of Iraq largely responsible for the serious human rights abuses, including war crimes committed by these militias. The victims were abducted from their homes, workplace, or from checkpoints. Many were later found dead, usually handcuffed and shot in the back of the head. Reports from families of the victims and witnesses have been corroborated by Ministry of Health workers, who told Amnesty International that in recent months they have received scores of bodies of unidentified men with gunshot wounds to the head, and often with their hands bound together with metal or plastic handcuffs, rope or cloth. Photographs of several bodies showed to Amnesty International by victim relatives and others viewed at Baghdad's morgue reveal a consistent pattern of deliberate execution-style killings. Continuing on. Some of the victims were killed even after their families have paid hefty ransoms. Several families told Amnesty International how they had received dreaded calls from the kidnappers, had searched frantically for the ransom money and had managed to pay, only to discover that their loved one had still been killed. And it continues on. Some of other victims are still missing, their fate and whereabouts unknown, weeks and months after they were abducted. Amnesty International documented dozens of cases of abductions and unlawful killings by Shia militias in Baghdad, Samarra and Kirkuk, with many more such cases reported all over the country. I want to add a disclaimer, and it's important that I add this disclaimer, as it's a very sensitive video. It is not sectarian, right? It's not sectarian when I or anyone else point towards the horrific crimes of a certain group that perpetrates sectarian violence against the other. It's not sectarian, right? And as you know, this is happening in Syria, this is happening in Iraq. Iranian backed militias have been perpetrating crimes against the Sunni population for a very long time. At the same time, it's not sectarian. As a Sunni, meaning from amongst Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, bringing this into an Sunni scope, when I call out the absolute brutality of indiscriminate airstrikes by Saudi, UAE in Yemen, and likewise what we see in Libya, UAE backed, and other countries that are backing these mad madkhalis who are committing extrajudicial killings in Libya, killing the population. This is intra-Sunni because of sectarian differences. The mad madkhalis are committing these crimes as we speak under the leadership of the Khariji Haftar. So what's happening in Sudan right now? Certain countries are invested in supporting one party who are perpetrating war crimes, perpetrating atrocities, and they're backing it, right? They're backing it, but then you have these preachers, lilasaf al-shadid, that cozy up to these rulers, and we call it out, but then we're labelled Khariji and whatnot. So as you can see, we've got a banner in Baghdad. This is plastered in Baghdad, which is the Kataib al-Imam Ali. This is the brigade of Imam Ali, and then he mentions al-Dhahir wal-Qawiyul al-Jayshun al-Batal, that basically our heroes in a nutshell, the strong, etc. And these are the militias that are carrying out persecution of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We're going to get to the al-Mufti Iraq. We're going to get to the Mufti of Iraq, who's Ash'ari, so it's not even a Salafist sort of thing, so people get sectarian, as you know. Conclusion recommendation. The human rights abuses detailed in this briefing are extremely serious and some constitute war crimes, notably the widespread killings by paramilitary Shia militias. The Iraqi central government authorities bear a significant part of the responsibility for the crimes committed by these militias. Militias have been armed and or allowed to be armed by the state. Successive governments have allowed and encouraged militias to operate outside any legal framework, and they have not been held accountable for the crimes they have been perpetrating. And then he continues on, he says, وَلَمَّا إِنْقَصَرَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ سَنَةَ الْغَزَّانِ, that when the Muslims were defeated in the year of Ghazan, you know, the Mongol Tartar ruler, أَخَذُوا الْخَيْلَ وَالسِّلَاحِ وَالْأَسْرَى وَبَاعُهُمْ لِلْكُفَّارِ النَّصَارَى. So when the Muslims were defeated, these Rafidah took horses and weapons and prisoners and sold them to the Christians بقبرص in Cyprus. وأخذوا من مر بهم من الجند وكانوا أضر على المسلمين من جميع الأعداء. That he mentions when the soldiers who were passing by were taken, they were obviously sold to the Nasara, and they, meaning the Rafidah, were more severe and harmful to the Muslims than the Jami' al-A'da. Come back to me now. So at that particular time, when the Muslims were dealing with an outside threat, meaning Mahmud Ghazan, who was a Tatar who allegedly became Muslims, but that's a different video. I've got that to do from Majmu' Flower, very expansive, refuting these pseudo-Salafis who claim Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and they'll be shocked to hear what he had to say about those who, qafaza ilayhim. We're going to get to that in another video. So they were more harmful, the Rafidah, than what? Than Jami' al-A'da. All of the enemies combined. Now, as I mentioned before, and we have pro-Assadist supporters, they are now jumping on the bandwagon and vocal for supporting Palestine. But yet, you find them shill for Bashar al-Assad. I'm going to continue on because I know there's going to be a pause and stop because I don't want to be continuously reading. To add, I have my issues with Umar Suleiman, right? With the liberal agenda, this modernist approach that he has. He was recently in the UK with Light Upon Light, women screaming, and there's no Islamic guidelines being followed. Like I said before, is there khair from those who we oppose? Of course there are. We can't say there's no khair from them. But at the same time, they have to stick to Islamic guidelines. But that's another issue. He recently mentioned about the inconsistency within the Ummah. And I believe there's some serious inconsistency within the Ummah. Like we're seeing everyone support Palestine, everyone supporting Shab Palestine or the Qadiyya of Palestine. But when it comes to other issues, they're silent. Or they don't mind rubbing shoulders with those who support the other side. It's shocking. So let's listen to Umar Suleiman.
If we're going to be honest, we have a lot of inconsistency to go around with this Ummah. Some of the most forgotten people right now in our Ummah are our Syrian brothers and sisters. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about inconsistencies, there's a lot of inconsistency to go around. The people that committed the crimes against our brothers and sisters in Syria are not our allies. We don't need them. People that deny the Bosnian genocide or whatever it is, the Uyghur, we don't need them. So there's a lot of inconsistency, and there's a lot of, well, this cause right now is different. I'm a Palestinian. I love my people. I love Al-Aqsa. I want to see Palestine free, but I'm not willing to swallow that inconsistency. Mm-hmm. So we have to be willing to just say there's a level of inconsistency all around, right? And it is a problem that the Ummah has as a whole, right? Where we can all look inwards and say, well, we've got to prioritize our well-being here. I think there's a lot of that in the Muslim world. Yeah. You
heard Umar Suleiman. Tabarakallah al-Azim, Allah reward him. 100% I agree with him. Clear inconsistencies. We don't need to ally with pro-Assadists. We need to boycott them. We don't want nothing to do with them. They're not our allies, as Umar Suleiman said. We as the Ummah need to make separation between those hypocritical allies who are now vocal for the Palestinian. But then, when it comes to Syria, they side with a bigger tyrant than Netanyahu. Over 700,000, 800,000 being killed by Bashar and his allies, including these Shia militias who have gone there and partook in these massacres. Right? Qasim Soleimani. You got Kataib Asab Ahl al-Haq. All these Iraqi militias, min huna wal hunak. You got these Zainabiyun and Fatimiyun coming from Afghanistan, and all of these Shia militias coming and taking part in these war crimes against our Syrian people. And any Western academic activist who conveniently ignores the Syrian suffering and then wants to join our cause when it comes to the Palestinians, so we don't need you. Okay, back to the story. So I just wanted to highlight that. Okay, let's carry on. So he mentions that they also carried some of the flags of the Nasara. And when he was asked who is better, the Muslimun, meaning Ahl Sunnah or Nasara, they would say, Bal Nasara. They used to say that. قالوا له مع من تحشر يوم القيامة, who would you be raised with on the day of judgment? فقال مع النصارى, with the Nasara. فَسَلَّمُوا إِلَيْهِمْ بَعْدَ بِلَادِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and they submitted or they gave away some of the lands of the Muslims. Now come back to me now. Let's look at our modern history. Iran has been at the forefront of sending their own revolutionary guards to Syria and Iraq to massacre Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. This is known. From 2003, they've been arming Shia militias, Muqtada al-Sadr with his Jaysh al-Mahdi. What the massacres they committed, we're going to get into an Iraqi Grand Mufti who goes into this. The massacres they committed. This is way before what we call Daesh in 2014. Then you had the Iran-Contra affair when Israel was funding Iran, believe it or not. As you can see on screen, got a report here, a brief history of Israeli-Iranian cooperation and confrontation. Okay, and this is part of the book, Israel and Iran, a dangerous rivalry. So we got chapter 2. It mentions that the Iran-Contra affair was a result of a secret effort by senior Reagan officials to free American hostages who have been held in Lebanon by Iran-sponsored Hezbollah. Iran's dire economic situation and the stalemate with Iraq made it more amenable to engagement with the United States. Iran required US arms to sustain its war against Iraq, and the United States was willing to sell its army in the hope of freeing the hostages and also financing the Contra guerrillas fighting against the Marxist Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. Israel became a conduit for arms transfer between the United States and Iran. Not only were such arms transfers financially lucrative for Israeli arms traders, but Israeli officials continued to find value in supporting Iran to counter the common Iraqi threat while leaving the door open for improved relations with Iran in the future. As the Iraq war persisted, Iran continued to collaborate secretly with Israel on defense issues while ramping up its rhetoric against Jewish state in public. This is what they do. The regime's painting of Israel as a threat to the Arab world eased Iran's sense of isolation and enhanced its image as a force of resistance. The Iran-Iraq war was depicted as an effort to liberate occupied Palestinian lands, hence the slogan, Rah-e-Karbala as Quds Mighrodan. The path to Jerusalem is paved way through Karbala. Iran also hastened the creation of Hezbollah after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. You're seeing the reality in front of your eyes. Is it wise to call for this? I don't think it is. I think it's very foolish in my opinion. Now, yes, there are going to be at times where they can be, and and we'll get to that later. We'll also highlight certain times in history when there was certain collaborations, but then when you look at the backdrop, there wasn't all of these pending issues that we're seeing now, especially with these sectarian militias operating where they are in our part of the world, killing Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah with impunity. But let's get back to the story. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah continues, وَمَا هَذَا فَلَمَّا اسْتَشَارَ بَعْدَ وُلَاةُ الْأَمْرِ فِي غَزْوِهِمْ. That when I saw istishara, consultation with some of the leaders in relation to their ghazwa, وَكَتَبْتُ جَوَابًا مَبْسُوطًا فِي غَزْوِهِمْ, and I wrote a sort of point regarding this ghazwa, وَذَهَبْنَا إِلَى نِهَايَتِهِمْ وَحَضْرَ عِنْدَ جَمَاعَةٌ مِنْهُمْ. And then we went there, we obviously attended this particular meeting. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, subhanAllah, I didn't pay attention. He says, وَجَرَتْ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَهُمْ مُنَاظَرَةٌ وَمُفَاوَضَاتٌ يَطُولُ وَصْفُهَا. He said, I had a lengthy discussion or a debate and compromising with them, but it's too lengthy to write. فَلَمَّا فَتَحَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ بَلَدَهُمْ. When so we finally opened this land, which was occupied by the Rafidah, وَتَمَكَّنَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ مِنْهُمْ, and the Muslims consolidated over them. What did the Rafidah do? They slaughtered, they started handing people over, etc. نَهَيْتُهُمْ عَنْ قَتْلِهِمْ وَعَنْ سَبِّهِمْ. Because I forbade killing them, even though they killed Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Ibn Taymiyyah forbade killing them and taking them as captives. وَأَنزَلْنَاهُمْ فِي بِلَادِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مُتَفَرِّقِينَ لِأَلَّا يَجْتَمِعُوا. That he mentioned that, so what we did was, we separated them in different parts of the land, okay, so that they can't come together. So they what? So they can't come together. So look at the justice of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It wasn't just theoretical. Oh, you know what, we are just, we treat them fair, we don't oppress them, etc. The Rafidah was slaughtering Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. The Alawiyun, Ibn Kathir mentioned in Al-Bidayah wal Nihaya, did the same thing. They went into the lands and the Alawiyun did. It's just like history repeating itself, right? It's just like history repeating itself. So Ibn Taymiyyah forbade killing them. Even though they were Rafidah, like, the extremist Salafis, they're murtadun, they're kuffar, this, that. And if they were in the shoes of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, they would have mass butchered them. But Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi said no. He forbade people from killing them. And he mentioned that we should just basically split them so they can't come together, which is wise because they can't unite and then cause more friction. To add, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi also goes into much more detail regarding the issues with the Rafidah, okay, and how they behave and their issues. So let's see. We've got Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 28, which is very important, this volume. We're going to go into much more detail. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah mentions, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مَعَهُمْ فِي دَوْلَتِهِمْ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ مِنْ شَرِّ الْخَلْقِ. That Ibn Taymiyyah mentions the ones that were part of the Maghul, the ones that the earlier Maghul, who were kuffar, who were wathaniyun, who were idolaters. No, these are the Maghul who were so-called Muslims, and they were invading in the Muslim lands, and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has a whole chapter about them in volume 28. We're going to get to that in a separate video to refute these pseudo-Salafis. So those who were part of these Mongols, so-called Muslims, were the worst of creation. So those who were with the Mongols were either the Zindiq, the heretics, and the Munafiq, who don't really believe in Islam internally. وَإِمَّا مَنْ هُوَ مِنْ شَرِّ أَهْلِ الْبِدْعِ. As for the worst of Ahl al-Bid'ah, كَالرَّافِضَةِ. The Rafidah was also with them, meaning the Mongols. Those so-called Muslims, these Mongol Muslims, the Rafidah were with them. Then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, وَقَدْ أَظْهَرُوا الرَّفْض وَمَنَعُوا أَن نَذْكُرُوا عَلَى الْمَنَابِرِ الْخُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ. That those who made their rafd apparent, and they forbade mentioning on the manabir, the Khulafa Rashidin, وَذَكْرُوا عَلِيًّا, and they mentioned Aliyan, وَأَظْهَرُوا دَعْوَةَ إِثْنَا عَشَرَ, and they, made apparent the da'wah of the 12ers. الَّذِينَ تَزْعُمُ الرَّافِدَ أَنَّهُمْ أَئِمَّةٌ مَعْصُومُونَ, and the 12ers make apparent that they are ma'soom, meaning the 12 Imams. Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman were kuffar, and they were oppressors. لَا خِلَافْ لَهُمْ وَلَا لِمَنْ بَعْدَهُم, and there's no khilaf from amongst them and those after them. وَمَذَبُ الرَّافِدَ شَرٌّ مِّن مَذَبِ الْخَوَارِجِ الْمَارِقِينَ. Look at that. That the Rafidah, their madhab is worse than the Khawarij al-Mariqin. فَإِنَّ الْخَوَارِجِ غَايَاتُهُمُ التَّكْفِيرُ الْعُثْمَانِ وَعَلِيًّا وَشِيعَتِهِمَا. That their goal is that they make takfir on Uthman and Ali and their followers. Then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, وَالرَّافِدَةُ التَّكْفِيرُ أَبِي بَكْرَ وَعُمَرَ وَعُثْمَانَ وَالْجُمْهُورِ السَّابِقِينَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وتجحد من سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أعظم مما جحد الخوارج وفيهم من كذب والافتراء والغلو والإلحاد ما ليس في الخوارج وفيه من منعونة الكفار على المسلمين ما ليس في الخوارج. Look at that. So he mentions the Rafidah make takfir of Abu Bakr, Umar and the Sabiqeen al-Awwaleen, and they negate the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam more so than the Khawarij do. And amongst them is lying and slander and ghulu, etc. Then he mentions, look, and they aid with arrows over, and they aid the kuffar amongst the Muslims, which is not found in the Khawarij. Then he mentions, وَالرَّافِضَةُ تُحِبُّ التَّطَارُ وَدَوْلَتَهُم, that the Rafidah love the Tatar and their state. لأنه يحصل لهم بها من العز ما لا يحصل من الدولة المسلمين. That with them they gain some sort of honor and power which they won't get or they won't attain from the states of the Muslims. والرافضة هم معاونون للمشركين واليهود والنصارى على القتال المسلمين وهم كانوا من أعظم الأسباب في الدخول التتار قبل إسلامهم إلى الأرض المشرق بخراسان والعراق والشام وكانوا من أعظم الناس معاونة لهم على أخذهم للبلاد المسلمين وقتل المسلمين وسبي حريمهم وقضية ابن العلقمي وأمثاله مع الخلفاء وقضيتهم. So it mentions that the Rafidah were the biggest aiders, right, or the biggest contributors for the Tatar qabla Islamihim, before the Islam to enter the Islamic lands. It was the Rafidah that were involved in this, right? And then they were the ones that brought the Rafidah in the Khurasan, like modern day Afghanistan. The Rafidah, Iran, were the ones that brought the American, or assist the American, not brought them, but assist the American. But Saudi Musharraf, so we can't really argue that there. Then he mentions, and in Iraq, same thing again. Modern history in the past. Sham, modern history, same thing in the past. And they were the main reasons and the causes for them aiding and taking the land of the Muslimin and killing the Muslims and taking their women. And Ibn al-Qami, the one that aided the Mongols, etc. And then he mentions, وَفِي حَلَب مَعَ صَائِبَ الْحَلَب, and in Aleppo, with the ruler of Aleppo, مشهورة يعرفوها عموم الناس, and it is known by the majority of the people. وكذلك في الحروب التي بين المسلمين وبين النصارى بسواحل الشام. And as for the war between the Muslims and the Christians in the coastal areas of Sham, قد عرف أهل الخبرة أن الرافدة تكون مع النصارى على المسلمين وأنهم عوانهم على أخذ البلاد لما جاء التتار وعز على الرافدة فتح العقة وغيرها من السواحل. And he mentions obviously they aided the people, the Mongols and the Mushrikeen in Aleppo and the coastal areas, and they get very happy when the Muslims are taken over. Now, come back to me. I don't want to make this into a constant reading. Now I'm going to play a video from the Grand Mufti of Iraq, who's Ash'ari. And he speaks about the crimes that were committed by the Iraqi militias amongst the population of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Most notably, Jaish al-Mahdi, which is the militia group founded by Muqtada al-Sadr. So let's have a listen.
هذه الحكومة حكومة طائفية بامتياز. الميليشيات المدربة في إيران تقتل على الهوية ليل نهار. ما يجري في السجون يندى له جبين الإنسانية. والله يا أخوان هنالك اغتصاب للرجال والنساء على حد سواء.
طيب لكن طلبتم
والله
من
يا أخوان هنالك إعدامات. نعم هنالك إعدامات من غير جريرة وقتل في السجون وإلقاء الجثث على قارعات الطرقات.
Okay, so the Mufti of Iraq is highlighting the plight of the Sunnis in Iraq during 2006. And I'll play another video when he talks about the massacres that they committed. How can one agree for cooperation with such people with the crimes they've committed? I'm sure the families of the Sunni Iraqis and the Sunnis families of those who are being besieged in Syria at the moment would absolutely laugh at us if there's any cooperation between Sunni and Shia. I assure you, when we look at the situation on the ground, yes, the political sphere and scene is different. I appreciate that. But we have to look at it from a perspective from Shara, right? Then we look at the reality and the context of each particular situation in certain regions or in certain places, especially in Gaza and whatnot. Because the Qadiyya of Palestine doesn't start at one particular moment in history. It started since 1947 or 1948 and it carries on. Yes, there will be mistakes made along the way due to the political scene on the world stage, bad decision, terrible compromises. That's going to happen. I'm sure it has, and it's going to continue to happen. Unfortunately, we are human. But at the same time, we don't remove our principles in order to fit the agendas or to follow the agendas of others. It's impossible. The crimes that are committed by the Rafidah since 2003 onwards, it's unforgivable. And the Mufti of Iraq also adds, let's play it again.
المظلومون في العراق المحافظات التي همشت أهل الناس شباب الناس الذين قتل آباؤهم وإخوانهم وأمهاتهم وأبناؤهم أمام أعينهم حينما ناشدوا العالم لم يكن هنالك من مجيب. كل المؤامرات التي جرت على أهل السنة والجماعة لم يتحرك فيها ضمير العالم. في 2006 ذبح في يوم واحد من أهل السنة والجماعة أكثر من 1000 شاب في بغداد.
I forgot to mention the Mufti name. His name is Rafi'i. Okay, he's the Mufti Diyar Iraq. He's the Grand Mufti of Iraq. He mentions that they slaughtered Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and when in one day alone in Baghdad they slaughtered 1,000 Sunnis. They killed them in front of their fathers, etc. And it was after the 2006 bombings of the shrines in Samarra, and they blamed Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, but in fact it was the Iranian according to this Mufti. So once again, we have amnesia when it comes to the absolute crimes committed by the Rafidah. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is just highlighting their true reality. Then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions the Khawarij, that they were criticized by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Annahum yuqatiluna ahlul Islam wa yad'una ahlul awthan," that they fight the Muslims and they leave the idolaters. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, "Wa annahum yakhrujuna ala hini furqatin min an-nas," that they came out when the people split, right? Wal Khawarij ma hada, that despite of all of this, the Khawarij lam yakunu yu'awinuna al-kuffar ala al-qital al-muslimin. Despite that, the Khawarij never aided the kuffar against the Muslims. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions, وَالرَّافِضَةُ يُعَاوِنُونَ الْكُفَّارَ عَلَى الْقِتَالِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. But the Rafidah fight or aid the kuffar against the Muslims. فَلَمْ يُكَفِّهِمْ, and it doesn't suffice them. أَنَّهُمْ لَا يُقَاتِلُونَ الْكُفَّارِ مَعَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, that they do not fight the kuffar with the Muslims. حَتَّى قَاتِلُوا الْمُسْلِمُونَ, but they fight the Muslims مَعَ الْكُفَّارِ, with the kuffar. فَكَانُوا أَعْظَمَ مُرُوقًا عَنِ الدِّينِ مِنْ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمَارِقِينَ بِكَثِيرٍ كَثِيرٍ, that they, okay, are more like outcasts from the religion than those mariqeen, meaning the Khawarij, بكثير كثير, Allah. وقد أجمع المسلمون على وجوب القتال الخوارج والرافضة ونحوهم, and it is an obligation for the Muslims to fight the Khawarij and Rafida and those like them. إذا, what's the shart? إذا فارقوا جماعة المسلمين, when they split and cause division amongst the Muslims. I want to go into the history of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi, because Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was 5th, 6th century. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah was the 7th, 8th century. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah dealt with the Twelvers and dealt with many tribulations, dealing with the Tatar, Mughal, Mahmud Ghazan, and likewise the Duruz or the Durzi, and then likewise the Rafidah. And then you can argue obviously internal theological issues with the Ash'ari. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi dealt with an extreme issue in his time involving another Shia group or heretical Shia group, the Ismailiyun al-Batiliyun, who were the Fatimiyun. And during that time, you would see how Nuruddin Zinki, Asaduddin al-Shurukh, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Najm al-Din, Al-Adil, and all the, the Kurdish family that took power after, but then it was the Turkic Zengids who were ultimately in control of like Mosul and certain northern parts of Iraq. So let's go into this now. As you can see on screen, we've got a Nawadir al-Sultaniyya by, which is a seerah of Salahuddin, written by Bahaddin ibn Shaddad or ibn Shiddad. Okay, now going into the story of when they went to Egypt, and there were certain reasons why they went to Egypt, and the plan hatched to unify Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah against the Fatimiyun because of the threat from the Crusaders, which was a springboard for them to potentially attack the Muslims. But Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah was looking at it holistically, and they hatched a very important plan. So as you can see, we've got the mentioning of the first sort of defense by his uncle Asaduddin Shirukh. And he says, وكان سبب ذلك أن الشاور, okay, شاور ووزير المصريين. Now وزير المصريين, the intent here is meaning the Fatimi Khalifs, okay. كان قد خرج عليه الإنسان يقال له درغام or درغام. That the reason for this is there's a man called Dirgham, okay, and he rebelled against Shawar, who was the ruler of one of the Egyptians, right? فجمعه جموعا كثيرا لم يكن لهم بها قبل. That he gathered, what's he called, the people, and he wasn't able to obviously withstand that. وغلب عليه, and he took over him, and he expelled him from Cairo. وقتل ولده, he killed his son. وَإِسْتَوْلَى عَلَى الْمَكَانِ وَوَلَى وُزَارًا, and he took over the place. So what happened? When he was defeated, right, and expelled, okay, he says, فَلَمَّا قُحِرَ الشَّوَّارِ وَأُخْرِجَ مِنَ الْقَاهِرَةِ اشْتَدَّ فِي طَلَبِ الشَّامِ قَاصِدًا خِدْمَةِ نُورِ الدِّينِ بن زنكي. So when he was defeated and expelled, he was wanted to, go to Syria and meet Nuruddin Zenki to seek his support. He said, فَقَدَّمَ Nuruddin إِلَى أَسَدِّينَ شِيرُوخُ, that Nuruddin basically ordered Asaduddin al-Shirukh, who was the uncle of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi, to go to Egypt to basically perform obligations. He mentions that Asaduddin was sent and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi went. عن قراحة منه لذلك, but he didn't really want to go, but he went with him, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. He mentioned وكان لوصولهم إلى مصر. So when they arrived to Egypt, right, the people started being afraid. Okay, the people started being afraid, and it mentions that وَنَصْرَ الشَّاوُورِ عَلَى خُصُومِهِ, and then Shawur defeated Dirgham. They defeat him. And he was put back into power, right? And he basically affirmed his position. وَإِسْتَقَرَّ أَمْرُهُ وَشَاهِدَ الْبِلَادِ وَعَرِفَ أَحْوَالَهَا. That Shiruch or Shiruchu basically learnt, once he could stay there for a bit, right? And learnt its situation. Look at this. So there was some reconnaissance going on. And he mentions that he returned back, وَعَادَ مِنْهَا, meaning back to Syria, and he wanted to take over the land. Listen to this, subhanAllah, look at the plot. وَعَلِمَ أَنَّهَا الْبِلَادِ. Then he said, وَعَلِمَ أَنَّهَا بِلَادِ بِغَيْرِ الرِّجَالِ. And he realized that this land has no men. ذِكْرُ عَوْدَهُ إِلَى الْمِصْرِ. Then he mentions his return to Egypt to defend it the second time. وَثَبَتْ ذَلِكَ. And the reason for it, وَهِيَ مَعْرُوفٌ بِوَقَةِ الْبَابِنِ. And then the Battle of Babin happened. So Asadin used to talk about this. I'm going to pace through it because it's quite lengthy. He used to talk about it amongst the people. And then he was basically, Shawwar heard about it and he was fearing an invasion. So what does this Shawwar do? He goes to the Crusaders, he wrote to them, asking to come to Egypt and take it over and maintain it. So this is a problem now. This is a problem because if the Crusaders get a grip of Egypt, and then they've got a launching pad to go into other territories from because they've already got Palestine, or most of it, they could go into the lands of Sham and then go into Iraq. It'd be catastrophic. Then he mentioned, فَاشْتَدَّ خَوْفَهُمْ عَلَى الْمِصْرِ أَنْ يَمْلِكُوهَا الْكُفَّارِ. Then what did he mention with the arrows over? That they feared what? That the kuffar would take Egypt and control it. They feared it. Nur ad-Din, Asad ad-Din Shiruchu, and Al-Adil, who's the brother of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, they feared this. And they can control it. So Asad ad-Din made preparations and Nur ad-Din sent troops with him. And the Sultan Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi was taken with him, even though he didn't want to go again. But it mentions, long story short, that they arrived to Egypt, and the Shawwar obviously was working with the Al-Franja. Al-Franja is the Crusaders, if anyone's interested. So after the battles, long story short, Asad ad-Din said, look, you're not going to come back to Egypt. Then he mentions, وَعَادَ إِلَى الشَّامِ فِي بَقِيَّةِ السَّنَةِ, that he returned to Syria for the remainder of the year. But he wanted to basically take it over because of the possibility of the Crusaders taking it back. So he basically continued to stay in Syria, but he really, really wanted to go back to Egypt because of the cause, because of Egypt being taken over by the Crusaders, which could be a launching pad, right? So what happened? He went back again for the third time. Look at this. وَكَانَ سَبَبُ ذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْفْرَنْجَ, that the reason for this, because of the Crusaders, خَذَلَهُمُ اللَّهِ, may Allah disgrace them, جَمَعُوا رَاجِلَهُمْ وَفَارِسَهُمْ, that they gathered their soldiers and their horses, right? وَخَرَجُوا يُرِيدُونَ الدِّيَارَ الْمَصْرِيَةِ, they left out because they wanted to take over Egypt. And what did he mention? ناكفين للجميع ما استقر مع المصريين وأسد الدين من الصلح والقواعد. فلما بلغ ذلك نور الدين وأسد الدين, that when Nur ad-Din and Asad ad-Din heard of this, they could not tolerate this. So what happened? So they sent out, صارعا إلى القصد البلاد, that they set out to go and take the territory. He mentioned ولما علم الفرنج وصول أسد الدين إلى مصر, that when the Crusaders heard of Asad ad-Din's arrival to Misr with the agreement, عن اتفاق بينه وبين أهلها, that there was an agreement between the locals, meaning and the people, they left back. They went back, راجعين. And then what happened? And then he mentions that he knew that the Crusaders, if they find any chance, أخذوا البلاد, they'll take the land. Then he mentions وأن الشوار يلعبوا بهم ترات, that Shawwar was playing with them sometimes, وَلَلْفَرَنْجِ تَرَاتٍ أُخْرَى, and he used to play with the Crusaders as well. So he was playing a game, this Shawwar. And what did he mention? Then he mentions that they follow a bid'ah which is famous. This is all about gaining power over the Fatimiyun eventually, gaining a grasp over it, as Bahadin ibn Shaddad mentions. And he knew they were playing games, etc. So, and they were upon bid'ah. So you can see there's an element of, getting Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah a foothold in this particular land. Imagine one time Shawwar was, riding, and he had his, leaders and stuff with him. They're playing the drums and whatnot. So in a nutshell, so a sultan here, where he mentioned illa sultan bi nafsi, this basically means the Sultani is Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. So even though he wasn't Sultan, then out of respect he was calling him the Sultan. أنه لما صار إليهم تلقاه راقبا وصار إلى جانبه. That when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi met him while he was riding, he went by his side, he grabbed him by his collar and ordered his soldiers to take hold of him and to seize his followers. Some of them fled and they were obviously taken. Shawar was arrested and placed in a tent. Long story short, they executed him and they placed Asad ad-Din as the leader, as the wazir. So you see, they took him slowly until they executed. Bahadin ibn Shaddad mentioned in the chapter where Asad ad-Din died, he said, وَلَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ مِنْهُمْ يُقُولُ. He said, I heard him say, وَلَمَّا يَسِّرُ اللَّهُ إِلَى الدِّيَارِ الْمَصْرِيَّةِ عَلِمْتُ أَنَّهُ أَرَادَ فَتْحَ السَّاحِلِ. That he said, when after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me to take over Egypt, he understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a plan to conquer the coastal region. And he planted that idea in my mind. Okay? And from that particular time, the position was established. And he launched raids, etc., etc. I'm just trying to cut it short. And then he mentions, Bahadin ibn Shaddad, هذا كله وزير متابع للقوم. And that was all the time he was a wazir. Okay? At the time he was following the people. So see the plan he had in mind. You see what I'm saying? See the plan he had in mind. It's all about taking over eventually. And then he says, لكنه مقوٍ للمذهب السنة. And this was strengthening Ahl Sunnah. You see, it wasn't about befriending the Shia, it's about taking over. And what? غارس في أهل البلاد العلم والفقه والتصوف والدين. And this was at the time of getting the people to learn, right, knowledge and in fiqh and tasawwuf. Okay, and tasawwuf. Because they were Sufis. No one's doubted about it. And the religion. Okay, so come back to me now before we go into it. So, as you can see, the steps gradually to take Egypt. There is a lot of context lost. The defending Egypt wasn't to do with an alliance with the Shia. It's about planting Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah gradually but slowly and defending Misr from Asham. Because if they were already in like the northern parts of Palestine and Lebanon, and if they had all of Misr as well, they would have had a better opportunity to take over Asham, and that would have been disastrous for the Muslims. So Nur ad-Din was very wise. He sent Asad ad-Din al-Shirukhu with Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. They went 3 times, and this was what he wanted to take over. You see, they followed a bid'ah mashhura, and also this is muqawwil li madhab sunnah wa gharis fil ilm wal fiqh wa tasawwuf. Now all of these pseudo salafis that say, oh, Sufi, tasawwuf as a science isn't anti-Islam. You can call it zuhd or whatnot, but tasawwuf is a valid science. Just because, okay, the modern day Sufis today, you could argue, right, they, munharif or whatnot, but tasawwuf isn't a problem. Don't get an allergic reaction when you hear tasawwuf. You understand? Or you hear Sufism. No. Asad ad-Din al-Shirukhu, Salahuddin, Nur ad-Din, they planted غارس في الفقه or غارس في العلم والفقه والتصوف together, connecting everything together, the soul, cleansing the soul, being getting your heart closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is important. So after that, what did they do with Shirukhu or with the Shawar? They grabbed him when they seized opportunity, when they know he's playing the game, grabbed him and took his head off. And then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was the one that did it. You understand? They didn't befriend them. There was just a long time plan, a long time. Then it mentions ذِكْرُ طَلَبَهُ وَالِدَهُ, that he called his father, so his father come to Egypt. And it mentions that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi continued being a wazir, right? لا يزال السلطان وزيرا محكما حتى مات العادد Abu Muhammad Abdullah, that he continued to be a wazir for Al-Adid. Why? Al-Adid. But that ended when he died. Then he mentions ذِكْرُ الْمَوْتِ الْعَاضِدِ, the death of Al-Adid, meaning the Fatimi Khalif. He says, وَكَانَ مَوْتُهُ فِي يَوْمِ الْإِثْنَيْنِ الْعَاشِرِ مِنَ الْمُحَرَّمِ مِنْ شُهُورِ السَّنَةِ 67 و500. That he died on the 10th of Muharram in the year 567. وَإِسْتَقَرَّ الْمُلْكُ لِلْسُلْطَانِ, and then the power was passed to Sultan. And what did he mention? SubhanAllah, with the arrows over. وَكَانَ خَطَبَ لِبَنِي عَبَّاسِ فِي أَوَاخِرِ الْأَمْرِ الْعَاضِدِ وَهُوَ حَيٌّ. He said that he made the khutbah, the power was passed to him temporarily, and he made the khutbah in the name of Bani Abbas. So he gave the khutbah in the name of Bani Abbas because the Khilafah al-Abbasiyah. SubhanAllah Azim, look how important the Khilafah is. Istaqarr al-Amr. Then he mentions, And he made the khutbah in the name of Abbas towards the end of his life, min al-Adid, while he was still alive. So even al-Adid was the leader. He was giving the khutbah in the name of Bani Abbas. Al-Adid had no power. Had no power after all of that. Look, let's go on the other side now. If Sunni and Shia got together, right, and they did, when the Thawrat al-Ishreen in the 1920s, when the British were in power in Iraq, Sunni and Shia got together to deal with a foreign enemy. The context is a bit different here, because the Shia weren't slaughtering Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and there was a common objective in mind, to get rid of the occupiers. So they got together. That's beautiful. We don't mind that. I don't think there's anyone who would have a contention with that at all. I think the issue now is that when you look at Syria, and the militiat that have been slaughtering Ahl Sunnah, Layla wal Nahar, and Iraq, Wama Qabla, and what happened before, with the Iran-Iraq war, when they were allying with Israel and whatnot. I'm not saying that Iraq was angelic, they were Ba'athis, there's no doubt about it. But if you look at the history as a whole, can Sunni and Shia, at this particular time, unite for Palestine? Can Sunni and Shia unite today on a global political stage in terms of what the Rafidah have been committing for the past 2 decades against Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Just for Palestine, I don't think that's plausible. And if they do get any power over us, you see what happens. It'd be a catastrophe. So, whilst, as I said before, contextually, the Arab leaders have failed, the Palestinian cause. So those in Palestine, if they look for support from Huna wal Hunak, they know their reality. I'm not living their reality. So I'm not going to go all guns blazing and say, oh, how dare they do this, how dare they? I might disagree with it, but I wouldn't be extreme in my opposition against their policies and against their approach and against their political endeavors. I don't think any brother that has a view that Iran really supports Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and really defends Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, yes, they might support it here and there. I'm not saying they don't do it. I'm not involved in politics, I don't know. But just for argument's sake, they do. Khalas, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal if they do. I'm just saying, in an ideal world, if they do unite in some capacity or in some scope, then it's not like it's the end of the world, but you have to look at it holistically, contextualize the reality on the ground. If what we see today, in terms of how Iran is behaving with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then no, of course not. Of course not. Not at all. And what Bashar al-Assad, the Alawiyin, the Iraniyun, and the Rus, what they've done in 13 years in Syria is not in comparison with what the Zionists have done in the last 11 years. So no, look at it intellectually rather than emotively. So take care of yourselves. Until the next video, sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.
ليس الغريب غريب الشام واليمن إن الغريب غريب اللحد والكفن إن الغريب له حق لغربته على المقيمين في الأوطان والسكن سفر بعيد وزاد لن يبلغني وقوتي ضعفت والموت يطلبني ما أحلم الله عني حيث أمهلني وقد تماديت في ذنبي ويسترني تمر ساعة